Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit now that we've kind of discussed the Articles of Confederation, both weaknesses and strengths of it. Strengths mainly being the ordinances that it creates dealing with lands to the west, and all the weaknesses we saw within it. It's pretty much ineffective. Now we're going to talk why there's a push for a development of a new revision and eventually the Constitution in itself. So we'll get to that just momentarily. So early on, basically, we see that people are pushing for a revision of the current Articles of Confederation. So they meet in Annapolis, Maryland. It's basically to regulate and talk about the inability of the Articles of Confederation to regulate commerce. Very few people show up at this point, and they decide to meet again. So later on, we see all the states minus Rhode Island meeting in Philadelphia to revise the Articles. But word gets out about Shays' Rebellion, and various people kind of push for a stronger central government. So eventually they're going to scrap it completely. So we do have people like Alexander Hamilton, Ben Franklin, and John Madison present, but people like Jefferson, who's on in France, and other more anti-federalists will not be present there or not invited. Okay, as we can kind of see here, the delegates here, you got 55 delegates showing up in Philadelphia to start their revision of the Articles of Confederation. As we know, they will completely scrap it, and as I mentioned before, it's kind of like building a house. Sometimes it's easier, instead of renovating a house, to just knock it to the ground and start new with a new foundation that's a lot stronger instead of trying to fix all the small things, because it had too many. So 55 delegates, mostly well off at this point, mostly young, and their hopes here are to preserve the Union, protect American democracy abroad, and preserve it at home. Because we saw that unrestrained democracy, like those rebellions of Shays' Rebellion, could get out of hand. So if you look at these individuals, you can tell that they're pretty well off in these pictures. They're not poor farmers. If they are farmers, they're going to be aristocratic plantation owners oftentimes. So well-to-do lawyers and things like that are going to encompass this group of people meeting. So basically, once they've pretty much completely scrapped the Articles of Confederation to create this new Constitution, they have to come up with certain plans of how the government will be set up. And for those of you who study government a little bit, we'll see kind of the ideas of Rousseau and Montesquieu kind of echoing in this Constitution that is created. So they come up with various plans and compromises. We're going to see one thrown out as the Virginia Plan, which was also known as the Large State Plan, which called on congressional representation based on a state's population. So the more people you have in a state, being unicameral at this point, it would allow those individuals large representation in our Congress. At the other end of the spectrum, we have the New Jersey or Small State Plan, which called for equal representation from all the states, much similar to what we saw under the Articles of Confederation. So basically, each state would have the same number of representatives. So eventually what this leads to is what is known as the Great Compromise or Connecticut Compromise, which balances the two. So we set up two houses of Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate. The House of Representatives would be based on your state's population and money contributed to taxes, as well as the Senate would be equal, that every state would have two senators representing them in the Senate. And as a result of that, all tax bills would start in the House of Representatives. Also, at this point, they push for a strong independent executive branch at this point because of the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. This individual will not only be executive, seen as a president, but also commander-in-chief of the military and the ability to veto any legislation coming out of Congress. Another compromise is going to be dealt with the forming of the Electoral College. A lot of people did not feel that the people should be able to directly vote for this individual person, so they would rather have them indirectly voted. They thought the people were too ignorant, so it's going to be based on the amount of state representatives or congressmen total in Congress, so that's the Senate and the House of Representatives from each state. And then the last compromise we can kind of talk about is the Three-Fifths Compromise. So in other words, for every slave, they will be counted as 3/5 of a person in representation. This will strongly help out the South with representation when it comes to apportionment and things like that. So basically, it's also going to set up the idea that after 20 years, that a lot of these people didn't like the idea of Congress regulating trade and commerce. So one thing that they were worried about is in the slave South, is taking away their slavery, but another thing is that they're going to shut off the slave trade, the importation of slaves rather, not just the trade, but the importation of slaves in 1807. So 20 years after this is initiated, they're going to do that. So you got these various compromises dealing with commerce, slavery. So slavery is obviously an issue. We also saw it addressed in the Articles of Confederation with the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. We see the Electoral College. They don't believe that people should necessarily directly vote for the president, and that it should be more of an indirect vote. And that the power of the presidency should be independent, and also have the power over the military. And then we saw the Great Compromise developing basically delegations and who gets put in the House of Representatives based on the portion or population of your state, and then the Senate's going to be equal. So that's going to cover main areas of the bundles of compromises and so forth, and I'll talk about other things later. Good luck.